Welcome. This is Zone 7 Gardening. We will be talking about summer blooming perennials today. The purpose of these plant clinics is to highlight native and other plants which grow well in our Mid-Atlantic hardiness Zone 7 gardens. This series of plant clinics is sponsored by the Virginia Cooperative Extension program of Virginia's two land-grant universities, Virginia Tech and Virginia State University. Now that it's late August, we expect to have about 2 months before we experience any frost. Take note that both Zone 7A and 7B, the earliest frost in autumn is typically in late October. This means cool weather vegetables can be planted now and expected to produce a crop. Even tender annuals will continue to grow until the frost kills them, so we still have time to enjoy flowering plants, annuals and perennials. Unlike annuals, which usually bloom from spring till frost, perennials, which we'll be focusing on today, usually have a period of bloom that is often shorter, but they can be just as showy as the annuals. Barbara is going to be talking to us about what's currently blooming in Zone 7 gardens and in the native landscape, the narrow-leafed evening primrose. I'm especially curious to learn more about this attractive yellow flower because I've seen it growing in the wild. So Barbara, we'd love to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Kathleen. All right, so hi, I'm Barbara with the Fairfax County Master Gardener program. So today I'll talk about Onothera Fruta Cosa. It's also called narrow-leaf evening primrose. As its name suggests, this plant is in the evening primrose family. However, it blooms during the day, and it has some specialized uses and attractants, as we'll see in the following slides. So the common names, narrow-leaf evening primrose, as I said, also called sundrops. You might hear them called that. They are native to Virginia and the eastern US. The stems are very slender, they're reddish and hairy, and it has lance-shaped leaves, so more long than they are wide. And they're about 2 to 3 inches long, and they alternate up the stem. The flowers are a brilliant canary yellow. They're 4-petaled, saucer-shaped. You can see that on the right side there. And they're about 1 to 2 inches across. They're mildly fragrant, and this plant can spread well when it's cultivated, and it can even become weedy or aggressive in its optimal conditions. And you can see its range on the left side there. So let's talk a little bit about the habitat and a little about the beautiful yellow blooms of the narrowleaf evening primrose. So like many plants, it prefers full sun locations with well-drained soils, and that's extremely important to it during winter to prevent damage. It will tolerate dry soil, and you'll find this plant natively in meadows, in open woods, and in soils that have been disturbed. However, it's also easily propagated by cutting or with seed. You can see in this photo where the narrowleaf evening primrose is being used as a small hedge, which was very pretty. I like that photo. And it's cold tolerant to zones 4 through 8. So here in our area of Northern Virginia, it does very well. The flowers are at the top of the stems. You can see that in the photo too. They bloom in late spring through summer. So you can see these now. And after flowering, there's a club-shaped seed capsule, which would also provide interest in a propagated garden or a site if you're looking for texture in your garden. So there are many benefits of Onothera Fruta Cosa. So let's start with conservation and wildlife. We've talked about some of the native habitat of this plant as meadows and the open woods and the disturbed soils, but you can also find this plant propagated in native plant landscaping, where it provides texture, color, and a nice medium size for interest. Various wildlife species use this plant, including pollinators such as bees and butterflies, which forage on the flowers. And the flowers themselves serve as food for pearly wood nymphs and a couple of moths. The primrose moth especially has evolved with the flower and is quite specialized. Hummingbirds are attracted to the nectar and the insects that feed on the plant. And some songbirds, such as the eastern goldfinch and the mourning dove, will eat the seeds, and the white-tailed deer will snack on the foliage. So, you may or may not want that if you're propagating this plant. On the slide, you can see a picture of the whole plant in a fairly inhospitable and rocky area. So this just tells you kind of how hardy it is, and it adapts and can thrive well in a lot of different habitats. So continuing with the benefits of Onothera Fruta Cosa, it has some ethnobotanical uses, which I really thought were interesting for our presentation today. It's a well-known medicinal plant to Native Indians, such as the Iroquois, the Cherokee, and the Ojibwe Indians, who used it. They all used it for weight loss, for upset stomach, and to treat bruises. There's also some research that shows how some of the compounds in the seeds of this plant show promise in treating breast cancer. And finally, I included a map of Virginia here to show where this plant is native across the state. So all of those red dots are where it's native. Settlers to Virginia took the seeds back, and this plant is also naturalized across Europe now. I hope this information has been useful to you, and it might be of help in identifying Onothera fruticosa or narrowleaf evening primrose if you're out on a hike or something, and that you might even consider incorporating it into your own native garden. And with that, I will end with these citations for more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. I actually saw these beautiful flowers just yesterday along a sunny stretch of a recreational path near my neighborhood where I was taking a bike ride. There they were growing in a wild, lush, meadow-like strip of vegetation bordering the trail near a stream. I'm so glad we have these green spaces in Fairfax County and flowers that support pollinators and benefit wildlife. Next, Lynn is planning to tell us about another yellow flowering perennial. This one is in the sunflower family, Helianthus. She'll share information also about an interesting plant with a seed head that resembles a blackberry. Take note of the picture on the left in this slide. This plant has a completely misleading common name. Blackberry Lily is the common name. It's misleading because it's not a berry, nor is it a lily. But I'll leave it for Lynn to explain the scientific name. It helps us identify its true nature. So over to you, Lynn.
The first plant that I'm going to be talking about is the Philianthus Maximiliani. This is also known as the Maximilian Sunflower. This plant is a perennial. It has 3-inch yellow flowers, and it's in the sunflower family. It grows 4 to 6 feet tall, and the best location for it is in full sun. This plant was named for the naturalist Prince Maximilian of Germany, who led an expedition into the American West in the 1830s. This plant grows in mesic to xeric conditions, which is on the dry side of things, and it blooms in the fall. Now, this is a large landscape plant. It might not be well suited in a small garden, but it makes a bold statement in large background beds. So this is more information that the plant is a prairie flower. It's mostly found in the western US. Livestock like to eat it, and it produces many seeds, and it spreads by rhizomes. Unfortunately, it produces compounds in the roots that deter other plants from growing around it. So it enables itself to hog up a lot of space. And you can see that the flowers occur where the branches occur. And you can see on this old sample of a Philianthus Maximiliani flower, and that the branches are where all the flowers are. So it's rather unlike a regular sunflower where you have one big stalk and a big head at the top. It's more of a small kind of gentle waving kind of flower. So the next plant I'm going to talk about is the Iris domestica. And it's known as the Blackberry Lily or the Leopard Lily. And it's known as the Blackberry Lily because it produces those seed heads that look very much like the blackberries I had for dessert last night. This is a perennial. The flowers are orange and spotted, hence the name Leopard Lily. And it grows in full sun or light shade in well-drained soil. And it blooms in late summer, and it gets to be about 3 feet tall. Now, you might say that this looks very similar to a lily, but actually it's in the iris family. So this is kind of a nice plant. It's very low maintenance and it's drought tolerant. And the flowers stay open for a day. And it's nice for like English cottage garden kind of situation. And it also makes a good house plant. It's native to Russia, China, and Japan. It only lives in the garden for about 3 to 10 years. It's interesting because these plants look very much like daylilies, and you can see that Michigan lily at the top, and also the orchid at the bottom. It looks very similar to that. But they did some DNA analysis, and they found that the Blackberry lily, despite its name, really belongs to the iris family. And I think you can see why that might be, besides the DNA testing, because of the leaves. If you look at the leaves on this iris, and then if I go back to the picture of the Blackberry lily, very similar leaves. And this is also the kind of leaf you find on a gladiola, which is also part of the iris family. So these are my references.
Thank you, Lynn. Those are great pictures and wonderful information. You're absolutely right that the Blackberry lily has these very flat sword-like leaves, which make it look like an iris, which it is, which they've discovered it is. I've actually been growing Blackberry lilies for several years, and I agree with you. They are carefree, disease-free, and they're good at self-seeding. Those seed pods that look like blackberry fruit are a collection of seeds that are easy to plant and grow, and they, like I said, they do tend to self-seed. So next, we're going to be hearing from Amy, who'll be sharing information on 2 additional flowering perennials, one in the mint family and the other in the aster family. So although we'll be seeing another yellow flower, it's not in the sunflower family, it's in the aster family. That is the Asteraceae family, and the mint plant family name is Lamiaceae. So let me turn it over to you, Amy. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Kathleen. So Botanica officinalis is a wonderful addition to a garden and to many landscapes. As Kathleen mentioned, it's a member of the Lamiaceae family or the mint family, and is often referred to by common names such as Betony, bishopswort, common hedge nettle, lousewort, purple Betony, as you can see in the picture here to the right, Stachys officinalis, wood Betony, and woundwort, among others. And as things can change in nature, so do names of plants from time to time. Betony was previously known as Stachys botanica or Stachys officinalis. An herbaceous perennial, Betony can be found in many different habitats, including meadows and gardens, parks and pastures, hedge banks and open forests. It grows 1 to 2 feet tall with large heart-shaped leaves on long stems that arise from the root, which is the bulk of the leafy part of the plant that's closer to the ground, as you can see on the picture on the left. Smaller, slender squared stems arise from those heart-shaped leaves, and those stems have alternate leaves, which are stalkless and appear in pairs at wide intervals along the slender stem, as you can see in the picture on the right. So really we have 2 different types or 2 different shaped leaves on this plant, on the Betony plant. So we have showy spikes of purple, lavender, red, or burgundy flowers. They are 2-lipped and appear in whorls along the upper stem. Betony produces shiny brown copper-colored fruits with slight bristles that grow as a schizocarp, which is a dried fruit that splits into single seeded parts when it ripens. You can see the difference from the left and what's close to the ground and those heart-shaped leaves, and then this spiked flower that pops up with a bold, brilliant color. And it's just really wonderful. Betony grows in well-drained clay, loam, or sandy soil with neutral pH and prefers 6 or more hours of direct sunlight a day. Betony can be found in coastal Piedmont and mountainous areas and is perfect for a variety of landscape location and types of gardens, and thrives in USDA plant hardiness zones 4A to 8A. This plant is mostly free of insects, disease, or other plant problems other than damage from snails and slugs. Leaves and flowering tops are used in making tea, and I would like to add that researching this flower, there seems to be an enormous amount of information on herbal remedies for Betony. I didn't want to get into that today because you could have a whole nother section on that, but there appears to be a lot of uses for Betony. So you may want to check that out. Now we'll move on to Helenium. Helenium, otherwise known as sneezeweed, is a member of the Asteraceae family, which includes asters, daisies, and sunflowers. Common names are sneezeweed, bitterweed, bitter sneezeweed, and Spanish daisy, among others. Helenium is a genus of annuals and herbaceous perennials, having yellow to orange, red, daisy-like flowers, and as folklore has it, is named after Helen of Troy. Sneezeweed will grow 1 to 2 feet, producing daisy-like flowers that bloom from mid-late summer into fall. Each flower features anywhere from 7 to 20 wedge-shaped golden yellow rays, with each ray having 3 lobes at the tip, and the rays droop downward from a spherical yellow center disc containing numerous tiny disc florets. The leaves and foliage vary then, with the alternate leaves in a lanceolate to elliptic shape, up to about 6 inches long, usually serrated, that create a winged effect from the base clasping running down the stem. It's really wonderful to see these plants in person. That top piece is just like a giant button and really attracts the pollinators. So when you see it, you'll likely see the pollinators as well, just sitting on top of that little button on the top. Sneezeweed is hardy in zones 3 through 8 and thrives in soil with high organic matter that is occasionally wet and well drained. It has a moderate growth rate and prefers full sun. Pests and problems are few with Helenium. You may see leaf spots, rust, powdery mildew, may be evident, although none are usually serious. This plant can be found in a variety of landscape habitats, primarily including disturbed areas, upland prairies, plains, rocky glades, woodland margins, gravelly areas along railroad tracks, roadsides, pastures, and sandy gravelly ground. Sneezeweed is most definitely a valuable pollinator. In preparing this information, I started to list a few different specific pollinators, but there are so many, I thought it may be helpful instead to direct you to the Mount Cuba Center. Resource didn't make the URL did not make my resource slide. So the link to that is Mount Cuba Center. So MT for Mount Cuba, CUBACENTER.org. And that's located in Delaware. They conducted a field trial of 44 species and cultivars where they evaluated the plants for their habitat, vigor, disease, resistance, floral display, and pollinator visits. And the native Helenium autumnale, which is very popular, had the most observed pollinator visits with 162, while the cultivar, Zimblestern, came in second at 151. Both of these had excellent powdery mildew resistance as well. So there are 2 varieties that you may consider when you're choosing sneezeweed for your garden. Helenium is also good for naturalizing and combines well with other perennials and grasses in the garden, including asters, Boltonia, Joe Pye weed, Liatris, Monarda, late blooming salvias, goldenrod, tall sedum, switchgrass, or big blue stem. While sneezeweed has been used by Native American Indian tribes for treatment of blocked sinuses or other ailments, please note that it does contain poisonous leaves and flowers for humans, and as such should be taken into consideration when using for medicinal purposes. The poisonous leaves and flowers are toxic only if large quantities are eaten. However, again, please be cautioned of the poisonous nature of the flowers and leaves. Helenium does not cause contact dermatitis, so if you touch it, it shouldn't bother you. And overall, it's a great selection for your landscape and your garden. Again, here are some resources for those flowers. We hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. That was great.
Amy, you might have covered this already, but why is it called sneezeweed?
I believe that the Native American Indian tribes, when they used it for their blocked sinuses,
I guess it caused sneezing, which unblocked sinuses. I
and
guess.
there was some folklore that mentioned that it comes around the same time as allergy season and is blooming, but perhaps the sneezeweed itself wasn't the cause of the sneezing.
There was also, in ancient times, the sneezeweed leaves were used dried as a form of snuff. So that very popular during the 1400s and 1500s, where people would take a bit of snuff and put it in their nose so that they would sneeze purposefully. And sneezeweed is among those plants that were used dried to make snuff.
Thank you, Anne.
And did you say you have blackberry lilies in your garden?
I do.
Mm-hmm. How do they fare for you?
Well, this is the first year that I have blackberry lilies. I got them at a plant swap with one of our other master gardeners and planted them in two places. The first place in direct sun in my front yard, and the second place in a pot on my sunny patio. Both have had wonderful flowers, and I look forward to the single day blooms because they're so cheerfully orange with spots. And I'm now have the seed pods that I'm waiting for them to burst open to see the little black seeds coming in. They make a marvelous addition to my garden.
I love them too. I've had them for several years, like I mentioned, and I have even seen hummingbirds visiting the flowers.
For our guests, one of the things that's very important about the asters is that they are a favorite of our pollinators. Generally, when we think about pollinators, we think about springtime flowers. We need to also think about fall for our pollinators, and these are particularly our native bees and our other bees and our flies and other things that we love to have in our garden. In the early spring, the pollinators are coming in and they want to have nectar to give them a robust way of living because they're coming out of hibernation. In the fall, they also need a lot of pollen and nectar because they're getting ready for the overwintering process. Generally, many gardeners don't pay a lot of enough attention to fall blooming pollinator plants. Well, members of the aster families are beloved by our native bees and our native pollinators for the very purpose that they are very high in all of the things that allow our native pollinators to survive the winter. So planting asters is there's thousands of different asters. So planting asters and sunflowers provide a lot of great benefits, both visually to us as gardeners and to our neighbors, but importantly to our native pollinators.
Thank you, Anne. That's wonderful information. I'm not an expert on plants, but I've been planting with perennials to try to attempt to have blooms across the season from spring through fall. And I gain much enjoyment watching the native bees, which are usually smaller than the honeybees and the bumblebees, watching those bees visit my flowers, because I have many things that are blooming right now in my own gardens. I'll continue with a few additional tips for gardening in August. August is often hot here, and sometimes we don't get much rain. I have a rain gauge in my yard, and it's been quite dry for the past 2 weeks. When it is hot and dry, a deep watering of the roots of your plants once a week in the morning should be adequate for most fruit, vegetable, and flower gardens. Avoid wetting the foliage. Avoid watering in the evening with a sprinkler or a garden hose that wets the foliage, precisely because this tends to lead to greater disease problems. Generally, when watering gardens, water slowly and deeply in the mornings and use an irrigation system or a soaker hose. or lacking one of those devices, there's a wand you can add to your hose, a rigid wand with a spray nozzle at the bottom. The wand allows you to direct the hose to the base of the plant where it's best to apply the water. So it goes to the roots and not on the foliage. I'll just mention one disease that you might be facing with hydrangea. This is Cercospora leaf spot. It's a fungal disease. Most diseases are either fungus, bacteria, or virus. This is a fungal disease. It often afflicts hydrangea. You'll know you have it if you see small purple leaf spots on the upper surface of a leaf. And the best advice is to dispose of the fallen leaves in the trash. You don't want to keep that fungus on the leaf around to reproduce and produce more fungus in the future. Fungicides are only used in extreme cases.
Kathleen, I am experiencing this leaf spot on my hydrangeas, and it is a very unsightly looking thing on my plant. And I have a big leaf hydrangea which blooms on old wood. And so I'm very unsure as to whether to just remove the diseased leaves or just leave them there. Do you have any advice in that case?
Well, I'm not an expert, and to verify that you do have it, or have you already sent a sample to the lab?
No, but it sounds like a good idea. And then I can know exactly what it is.
Right, that's what I would recommend. Send a sample of the leaves to our lab, get a positive identification, and then you'll have some advice as to how to control it. Now, to maintain the plant vitality and keep them flowering, we advise removing spent flowers of flowers like cosmos, zinnia, marigold, scabiosa, and others. Before using any pesticide, make sure you have properly identified the disease or pest. As we've just been talking about, Fairfax County Master Gardener Association plant clinics and our diagnostic lab are at your service exactly for this purpose. These tips actually I got from our own newsletter at fairfaxgardening.org. Essentially, I was just talking about mostly annual flowers, about deadheading. However, there's a whole nother category of plants that are seed-bearing plants, such as Echinacea, which attracts our pollinators and is a native, Gaillardia, and other seed-bearing plants. At this point, birds are interested in eating those seeds. So my tip this month is to stop deadheading at this point so that the birds can have a meal. I've actually seen goldfinches on my Echinacea this month. And you can also, you can leave those seed heads up. Keep in mind that some dried flower heads on plants, such as tall sedum, globe thistle, astilbe, and coneflower, can look attractive throughout the fall and winter. So there's an aesthetic side to keeping the seed heads there. And there's also a practical side in that you can be feeding birds and other wildlife that are looking for those seeds for food. Back to annuals. Now is a good time to cut back and fertilize your potentially overgrown leggy annuals that might be growing in beds, containers, and hanging baskets. Cutting them back and fertilizing them will allow them to produce another flush of growth before the plants succumb to frost in the fall. Like I was mentioning earlier, we still have about 2 months of growing season here before we expect frost. On the other hand, perennials, which are going to die back into the ground, trees and shrubs, it's not advised to be fertilizing them at this time of year. Late summer fertilizing tends to produce tender new growth that will probably be damaged by the cold weather. So you want to allow trees, shrubs, and perennials to do their natural dieback, which is not happening right now, but will be happening. So you don't want to be fertilizing those kind of plants right now.
Sorry, new gardener here. I have a lot to learn. I bought, I guess it's Calabatroa. It's annual, and it's beautiful. So when you talk about cutting them back, even though they tend, I guess they self-clean themselves, like they'll just dry up, the bulbs will, and then reproduce later. Do I still need to cut it or trim it back?
You know, that's one annual that I'm familiar with, and mine is growing fine and continuing blooming.
Okay.
Erica, you have hit the nail on the head. The point is, it is like self-cleaning, and unlike a petunia, which it is good if you keep pulling off the blooms,
Mhm.
blooms as they expire. You don't want to pull off the growing ones unless you're putting them in a vase to enjoy them in the house.
Mhm.
Anyway, Calabranchoa, mine's doing fine, and I personally would not cut it back at this point. But
Okay.
I am continuing to water it,
Yes.
and I may give it some fertilizer if it's looking a little bit weedy.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Planning ahead a little bit, my final tips are about thinking ahead. Now is the time to make a list of the perennials to move and divide this fall and decide where you might plant those new divisions. Or if you've got too many and not enough space, you could be giving some of those away at a plant swap. Plan to finish dividing plants about 6 to 8 weeks before the first hard freeze so that the roots have plenty of time to recover from the onset of winter weather. I noted the date 10/25. That's not necessarily the date of our first hard frost. My experience has been we have some gentler frosts at the start of the winter. And so the hard frost doesn't usually occur till sometime in November. So you don't need to be anxious about doing this right now, but you might want to plan ahead about dividing your perennials soon. And it's also time to order spring flowering bulbs while the selections are good. If you're buying bulbs directly from the garden center or nurseries, I recommend you choose the largest bulbs available because you'll get the best results. Be wary of so-called bargain bulbs. If bulbs are small or of inferior quality, they may not be much of a bargain. I've bought smaller bulbs and they give you smaller flowers, if they give you flowers at all. Sometimes it's not worth spending the money on the bargain bulbs. Our virtual plant clinics are only part of what we do. Here I'm showing you the address for our website, fairfaxgardening.org. And I just want to kind of highlight home turf. If you are struggling with a lawn at your home, Fairfax County Master Gardeners can come out and do a soil test and also give you some advice on how best to care for your lawn. The final product is a nutrient plan for how to fertilize and care for your lawn. Check out monthly articles that appear on our website. We also have an Instagram account, and you can sign up for website updates and search for gardening advice. Each month, a new collection of articles are published on our website. And there's also an archive of information that you can search at the website. These virtual plant clinics have been happening since 2001 and have been recorded. So we have a YouTube channel, which you're welcome to visit, to search for recorded programs about many topics on vegetables, on lawn care, and Zone 7 gardening, which focuses on ornamentals. I want to thank everyone for attending. I hope we see you again soon. Happy gardening, everyone. Thanks for joining us.